You wake up, and for a moment the world feels seamless. The hum of your room, the soft pulse of your body, the feeling of being someone. You assume this awareness is simple, that you are observing the world. But that sense of certainty, that quiet conviction of self, is a construction, built, refined, and maintained by a 3-pound organ behind your eyes. You are not passively receiving reality, you are creating it. Every second, billions of neurons exchange electrical whispers, building a model of the world and of you inside it. But what happens when that model fractures? When the system that holds your identity together flickers, even for a moment? Throughout history, people have reported experiences that defy logic, floating above their bodies, feeling presences in empty rooms, seeing things no one else can see. Ancient mystics called them revelations. Today, neuroscientists call them disruptions in the self model. Yet the mystery remains. Why do they feel so real? In the 1980s, a scientist named Michael Persinger built a device that would become infamous, a modified motorcycle helmet laced with electromagnetic coils. He called it the God Helmet. Volunteers sat in a dark, silent room, while faint magnetic pulses targeted their temporal lobes, regions deep in the brain responsible for memory, emotion, and identity. They weren't told what to expect, but what happened stunned even the researchers. One woman gasped, "There's someone here," she whispered. Others felt waves of peace, overwhelming love or terror. A few claimed to see radiant beings standing beside them. There were no drugs, no hypnosis, only electricity. Persinger's conclusion was bold. Perhaps divine encounters were byproducts of brain activity. The same neural networks that define where you end and the world begins could, under the right conditions, dissolve that boundary entirely. The brain, sensing something impossible, fills the gap with meaning. Someone is here. This region, the temporal lobe, is more than an archive of memory. It's a gatekeeper of selfhood. When its rhythms are disrupted, the distinction between me and not me begins to blur. But not everyone is affected the same way. Some brains are simply more sensitive, wired to detect patterns others miss, prone to flashes of transcendence or fear. These are often the same individuals who sense presences in still rooms, who dream vividly, who feel thunderstorms before they arrive. Their brains run closer to the border between perception and imagination. Persinger's work was provocative, but it came with a fatal flaw. The results were inconsistent. For every person who met an invisible presence, another felt nothing at all. Science demands reproducibility. And so, for years, the God Helmet became more myth than method, a curiosity at the edge of neuroscience. Until, by chance, another discovery revived the mystery. It happened in 2002, in a hospital in Lausanne, Switzerland. A young woman lay awake on the operating table, her skull open. She was conscious. Local anesthesia allowed her to respond to questions as neurosurgeon Olaf Blanke mapped her brain to treat severe epilepsy. One electrode touched a region just behind her ear, the temporoparietal junction, a small jolt of current. And suddenly, she gasped. "I'm up there," she said. Her voice trembled. "I can see myself from above." The team froze. Blanca looked at the monitors. Nothing had changed, except her perception. When he turned off the current, the sensation vanished. When he turned it on again, it returned. Her consciousness seemed to leave her body, watching from the ceiling as her own form lay still below. This was not a hallucination. To her, it felt utterly real, as vivid as ordinary waking life. A simple 2-second burst of electricity had shifted her entire sense of being. The implications were staggering. For centuries, humans had described out-of-body experiences as mystical events, glimpses of a soul untethered from the flesh. Now, a few millivolts could produce the same result. The self, it seemed, was not anchored in the body, but in the brain's map of the body, a simulation so seamless we forget it's a simulation at all. The temporoparietal junction, or TPJ, is where vision, touch, balance, and proprioception converge. It's the brain's internal GPS, integrating signals from your eyes, your inner ear, your limbs, and your skin to create the feeling that you are located somewhere specific in space. Usually, that somewhere is behind your eyes. But that's not a given. It's a decision the brain makes every millisecond, balancing countless inputs into a single coherent you. Disrupt the rhythm, and the illusion breaks. Your self floats, fractures, relocates. In that instant, the boundary between first-person experience and the external world collapses. The brain doesn't know how to interpret the data, so it improvises. It invents a perspective from above. Blanca later reflected on this paradox. "It's not the out-of-body experience that is strange," he said. "It's the inside-the-body experience that's strange." Think about that for a moment. We treat being inside our body as natural, obvious, but it's an active construction, maintained every instant. Without it, the mind drifts. With it, we forget that we are drifting at all. Millions of people have reported similar phenomena, often at the edges of consciousness, in exhaustion, trauma, or the half-light between waking and sleep. In these liminal moments, the machinery that stabilizes the self falters. The dreamer floats above their bed. The driver watching an accident unfold feels detached, observing from afar. The meditator dissolves into light, all of it emerging from the same fragile system, built to make sense of an overwhelming world. But sometimes the split goes further. Not merely outside the body, but inside the mind itself. The illusion of unity fractures, and two separate selves awaken. In the 1960s, neurosurgeon Roger Sperry treated patients with severe epilepsy by severing the corpus callosum, the thick bridge of nerve fibers connecting the brain's two hemispheres. The seizures stopped. But what replaced them was something even more extraordinary. After surgery, these split-brain patients behaved normally until tested. When researchers presented different images to each eye, the two hemispheres responded independently. A picture of a snow scene shown to the right hemisphere made the left hand reach for a shovel. A picture of a chicken claw shown to the left hemisphere made the right hand point to a chicken. When asked to explain, the patient's speaking hemisphere, the left, rationalized the contradiction. "Oh, the shovel is for cleaning the chicken coop." The brain was inventing stories to maintain coherence, unaware that two separate minds were working in parallel. Each hemisphere had its own perceptions, memories, and will, but only one could speak. When researchers asked, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" the left hemisphere said draftsman, while the right spelled race car driver with letter tiles. One body, two selves. This shattered a fundamental assumption of neuroscience, that consciousness is singular, indivisible. Instead, it seemed to be a system that could duplicate itself within the same skull. Two centers of awareness, each complete, each believing itself to be the self. What does that mean for you, sitting here, listening to this voice? The you feel right now is not one thing. It's a harmony of countless neural processes, synchronized just enough to feel unified. Disrupt that harmony, and the chorus splits. The self is not an object. It's an event, one that can shift, fracture, even vanish, yet return as if nothing happened. Every morning, you wake and rebuild the illusion anew, piecing together memories, sensations, and identity into a single seamless experience you call me. But that experience is delicate, and it can break in ways that reveal what lies beneath. The question that now haunts neuroscience is no longer what is consciousness, but where does it go when it slips beyond the body? If a few volts can launch awareness outside itself, if two hemispheres can host separate minds, then perhaps consciousness isn't confined to the boundaries we imagine. Every flicker of awareness, every heartbeat of self-recognition, is the brain constructing a world and placing you inside it. But what happens when that system encounters something it can't explain? When its familiar logic collapses? There are moments on the edge of sleep where your body vanishes. You feel yourself expanding, falling, or floating. In those instants, your temporoparietal junction relaxes its grip. It stops stitching sensory data into a single perspective. And for a heartbeat, you exist everywhere and nowhere. That flicker, that drift into the infinite, may be the closest glimpse we get of what consciousness is before the brain defines it. Because before the boundaries, before the story of I, there is only awareness, vast, undivided, waiting to become someone. When you wake tomorrow and feel yourself behind your eyes, remember this: that's not a fact, it's an act. Your brain is performing you, moment by moment, to make sense of a universe too wide to hold. And somewhere, deep beneath the rhythm of your thoughts, the question remains: if the self is an illusion, who is having the illusion? There's a strange irony in being human. We live our entire lives inside our own minds, yet most of us never stop to ask what the mind actually is. We assume it's contained somewhere in the folds of the brain, a private chamber where thoughts flicker and fade. But if you slow down and really look, if you trace a single thought as it rises and falls, you begin to notice something deeply unsettling. The thought doesn't appear in anything. It simply appears. Awareness doesn't have a location, or a boundary, or even a size. It's not inside your head at all. Close your eyes for a moment. You hear the sound of your own breathing, the hum of distant noise, the feeling of your body resting. All these sensations are present, yet if you look closely, they're not in a place. You can't find a border around the sound of your breath, or a line where the feeling of your body ends. Everything simply arises in a kind of open space, an invisible field that has no shape or edge. We call this field consciousness. And yet, when you open your eyes, your mind immediately rebuilds the illusion that there's an observer, someone inside the head, looking out through the eyes, steering the body like a machine. It's an ancient reflex, something evolution built into us to help us survive. But that inner observer, that voice that says, "I am here," is not a fixed entity. It's a process, a story the brain tells itself so that experience can make sense. The neuroscientist Anil Seth describes this as a controlled hallucination. Your brain isn't passively observing the world, it's actively creating it. Every sound, sight, and feeling is a construction, built from predictions, memories, and limited sensory data. The world you think you're seeing is not raw reality, it's an interpretation. And the self, the I, is the most convincing hallucination of all. But if consciousness isn't trapped inside the skull, where does it truly begin or end? This is where science starts to stumble, and philosophy begins to whisper. Some researchers suggest that the brain might not generate consciousness at all. Instead, it could act as a kind of filter, a receiver that narrows down a vast, boundless awareness into a manageable stream, like tuning into a single frequency on an infinite radio dial. This idea, known as the filter theory of consciousness, has roots in the writings of William James and Aldous Huxley. They propose that the brain's job isn't to produce consciousness, but to reduce it, allowing only the parts relevant for survival to come through. In this view, consciousness is not personal, it's universal. You are not a fragment cut off from existence. You are existence itself, temporarily focused through the lens of a body and mind. Consider what that would mean. When the body dies, when the lens breaks, consciousness doesn't vanish. It simply returns to its natural, unfiltered state. What we call death might not be an ending, but a transition. The ego, the sense of individual identity, dissolves, but awareness itself continues, just as the ocean continues when a wave collapses back into it. Of course, this is a terrifying idea for the ego, because it means that you, as a separate being, don't survive. But it's also deeply freeing. If consciousness is the ground of all experience, then nothing is ever truly lost. Every thought, every feeling, every moment of awareness has always been part of something infinite. You can glimpse this truth in rare moments, when the mind grows quiet and the boundaries blur. Watching a sunset, listening to music so beautiful it dissolves thought. Sitting in silence until even the concept of you fades into the background. In those moments, there is no observer and no observed, only awareness itself, effortlessly existing. The poet Rumi once said, "You are not a drop in the ocean. You are the entire ocean in a drop." It's a metaphor that points to this same mystery, that what we call the self is not a separate thing, but a reflection of something vast beyond measure. And yet, the illusion of separateness persists. It has to. It's what allows us to navigate life, to plan, to love, to fear. Without the self, there would be no way to function in the world. But there's a difference between using the self as a tool and believing it's all you are. When you believe the story completely, you begin to suffer. You fear death because you think awareness will end when your body does. You chase pleasure because you think fulfillment lies outside of you. You feel lonely because you forget that, at the deepest level, there is no real separation at all. Every spiritual tradition has tried, in its own way, to help people wake up from this illusion. The Buddhist speaks of no self, or anatta, the recognition that the I is not a permanent soul, but a momentary process. The Hindu mystic speaks of Atman and Brahman, the inner self that is one with the universal consciousness. Even in Christianity, there are traces of this truth in the words, "The kingdom of God is within you." But you don't have to be religious to sense it. The same idea is emerging in physics, neuroscience, and philosophy. Quantum mechanics shows us that the observer cannot be separated from the observed, that the act of measurement itself changes reality. Neuroscience shows us that our perceptions are constructed, not discovered. And philosophy reminds us that consciousness might not be a byproduct of matter at all, but the fundamental fabric from which matter arises. When you begin to entertain that possibility, everything changes. The world around you stops feeling like something out there. Instead, it feels intimate, immediate, alive. Every sound, every light, every heartbeat is not happening to you. It's happening as you. Awareness is not trapped in the body is trapped in awareness. It's strange to even try to imagine this, because language itself is built around the illusion of separation. Every sentence has a subject and an object, a doer and a thing done to. But consciousness has no subject or object, it just is. It's like a mirror that reflects everything yet is untouched by what it reflects. You can crack the reflection, distort it, fill it with stories and names, but the mirror itself remains clear and infinite. If you could fully see through the illusion of self, you might still live your life as before. You'd eat, laugh, work, and love, but the fear at the core of existence would dissolve. You'd no longer feel like a tiny self clinging to the edge of an endless void. You'd realize that you are the void, the silence from which everything emerges, and to which everything returns. Death in this light becomes something different. It's not the annihilation of consciousness, but the end of identification with a particular form. Just as the wave is never separate from the sea, you are never separate from the whole. You only appear to be. This perspective might sound poetic, but it's not simply fantasy. People who've had near-death experiences, deep meditative insights, or psychedelic awakenings often describe the same revelation: that consciousness is not confined to the body, that time dissolves, and that love or unity becomes the only reality that feels true. They speak of merging with light, or of seeing all things as one continuous field of being. Maybe these aren't hallucinations. Maybe they're glimpses, brief moments where the filter loosens and something greater shines through. It's humbling to consider that everything you've ever known, your memories, thoughts, feelings, and fears, might be ripples in a vast ocean of awareness, and that even now, beneath the noise of thought, that ocean is still silent and infinite. When you sit quietly and turn attention back on itself, you can sense it. Awareness aware of itself. No name, no story, no border. Just the pure experience of existing. That's not something the mind can understand, because the mind itself is part of the illusion, but it can be felt, like sunlight seen through closed eyes. This realization doesn't make life less precious. It makes it infinitely more so. Because if consciousness is all there is, then every moment, every breath, every flicker of awareness is the universe experiencing itself through you. You might wonder what the point of life is, if the self is just a temporary appearance. But perhaps the point was never survival or achievement. Perhaps the point is simply to be. To experience the play of form and formlessness. To taste what it's like to be a human dream moving through eternity. Some ancient teachers called this play Lila, the divine dance, life and death, joy and pain, birth and decay, all parts of the same infinite rhythm. The self is a dancer in that rhythm, forgetting for a time that it is the dance itself. And so, the invitation is simple: to look closer, to question what you are, not as a thought or belief, but as a direct experience. When you strip away everything that can be observed, your thoughts, your body, your memories, what remains? You can't describe it, but you know it's there. The silent awareness that's been with you through every moment of your life, unchanged, unaffected. The same awareness that watched your first memory, your first love, your first heartbreak. The same awareness that will be present in your final breath. And maybe, just maybe, that awareness never began and will never end. It is what you have always been. Not the thinker of thoughts or the dreamer of dreams, but the stillness in which all thoughts and dreams arise. To see this clearly, even for a moment, is to wake up from the oldest illusion of all, the illusion of being a separate self. There's a moment that comes to everyone who truly begins to question the nature of the self. It's not a thought or an idea, but a feeling, a quiet unease that seeps through the edges of awareness when you start to realize that everything you've ever taken for granted might be an illusion. You begin to sense that the you, who watches your thoughts, makes your choices, and lives your life, might not exist in the way you believed. It's a strange, almost vertigo-like sensation, as though the ground beneath your mind is starting to give way. Most people turn away from this feeling. They distract themselves, turn on a screen, start talking, thinking, doing anything to avoid the silence that threatens to reveal the truth. But if you stay with it, if you allow that disorientation to deepen, something incredible happens. The fear begins to dissolve, and what replaces it is not emptiness, but a vast, luminous clarity. In that clarity, you begin to see that the mind has been creating a kind of theatre all along. Thoughts are like actors stepping onto the stage, each one pretending to be you. A thought arises: I'm tired, I'm worried, I'm alive. And with it comes a sense of ownership, as though there's someone inside pulling the strings, thinking the thoughts. But when you look closely, that someone never appears. There are only the thoughts themselves, self-arising, self-fading, like ripples appearing on the surface of a pond. The philosopher David Hume once wrote that when he looked inward to find the self, all he could ever discover were perceptions, thoughts, sensations, feelings, but never the I that supposedly owns them. The self, he concluded, is like a bundle of experiences tied together by memory, not an independent thing. The only thing that gives the illusion of continuity is the story we keep telling ourselves about who we are. And that story runs deep. From the moment you're born, your mind begins to weave it. Your name, your memories, your ambitions, your fears, all threads in a tapestry that defines your identity. But like any story, it's made of words, of symbols. It's not the reality itself. You are not the story of your life. You are the awareness in which that story appears. You can test this directly. Sit in silence for a moment and watch your thoughts without trying to control them. A thought arises. I'm bored. Another says, this is pointless. Another says, I'm watching my thoughts. But who is the I in those sentences? You can observe the thoughts coming and going, but the one who observes never changes. That quiet observer is not a person. It has no age, no history, no name. It's the same awareness that was there when you were a child, the same awareness that will be there when you are old. It's easy to confuse that awareness with attention, but they're not the same. Attention moves. It focuses on sounds, sights, emotions, and thoughts. Awareness doesn't move at all. It's the space in which everything appears. You can shift your attention from your breathing to your heartbeat, from your heartbeat to a memory, but awareness remains constant. It's always here. It's what allows anything to appear in the first place. The problem is that we've spent our entire lives identifying with what appears within awareness, with thoughts, emotions, memories, and sensations, instead of recognizing the awareness itself. We've been hypnotized by the content of consciousness, forgetting that consciousness itself is the one thing that never comes or goes. In this way, the self is like a character in a dream, unaware that the dreamer is the one experiencing it all. You go through life thinking, I am this person, I am this story, but in truth, you are the dreamer, not the dream. And when the dream ends, when the body dies and the brain quiets, the dreamer doesn't die. Only the story does. This is not just philosophy. It's something many people glimpse in near-death experiences, in moments of deep meditation, or even during profound grief, when everything you thought you were begins to collapse. There's a silence that opens up behind it, and that silence feels more real than anything else. People describe it as infinite, timeless, radiant, and strangely familiar, as if they're remembering something they had always known but had forgotten. What if that silence is what you truly are? What if the entire arc of your life, every memory, every success, every heartbreak, is like a single wave rising and falling within that endless stillness? The wave seems separate while it moves, but when it dissolves, nothing is lost. The ocean remains, unchanged. Science, for all its brilliance, struggles to describe this. The tools of measurement break down when the thing being measured includes the measurer. Neuroscience can describe the brain's activity, the chemical dances of neurons, but it can't explain why there is something it is like to experience them. Why should electrical impulses produce awareness at all? Why should there be a world of colors, sounds, and sensations, rather than just darkness and silence? This is called the hard problem of consciousness, a phrase coined by philosopher David Chalmers. And despite decades of research, it remains unsolved. Every attempt to explain consciousness as an emergent property of the brain eventually runs into a wall. because it assumes matter gives rise to mind. But what if it's the other way around? What if mind gives rise to matter? That might sound radical, but it's not new. In fact, some of the greatest scientific minds have hinted at this idea. Max Planck, the father of quantum theory, once said, "I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as derivative from consciousness." Even Albert Einstein, though often cautious with metaphysical claims, admitted that the distinction between the self and the rest of the universe is a kind of optical illusion of consciousness. The deeper we look into the fabric of reality, the stranger it becomes. At the subatomic level, particles don't have definite locations or properties until they're observed. They exist as waves of probability, potential, not actual. It's the act of observation that collapses that potential into something concrete. In other words, the universe doesn't seem to exist in a fixed state independent of consciousness. Consciousness and reality appear to be entangled. If that's true, then consciousness might not be something that happens inside the universe. It might be the very field in which the universe happens. Matter, time, and space could all be ripples within an infinite sea of awareness, like patterns in a vast dream. This perspective can sound abstract, but it's also deeply intimate. Because if everything arises within consciousness, then everything you see and feel, the people you love, the stars overhead, the ground beneath your feet, are all expressions of the same awareness that's looking out through your eyes. The universe is not a thing you're in. It's what you are. Of course, the mind resists this. It wants to maintain its boundaries, its story, its sense of control. To the mind, the idea of dissolving into a vast, impersonal awareness feels like death. But to awareness itself, there was never anything to lose. The self's disappearance is not the end of life. It's the end of the illusion that life was ever separate. Sometimes, you can feel this even in small moments. When you're completely absorbed in a song, or lost in laughter, or overwhelmed by beauty, the self temporarily disappears, and all that's left is experience itself, raw and immediate. You don't vanish, you expand. You stop being a point of consciousness and become the field itself. It's easy to dismiss those moments as fleeting, but they might be glimpses of a deeper truth, moments when the curtain lifts and the stage of the self briefly falls away, revealing what was always there behind it. And maybe that's why we spend so much of our lives searching for love, for purpose, for belonging. Deep down, we're not looking for something new. We're trying to return to something we already are. Every desire, every craving, every ambition is a distorted echo of a single longing, the longing to remember. The illusion of self is not a mistake. It's a necessary part of the play. Without it, consciousness could not experience itself in the infinite ways it does. But the danger lies in forgetting it's an illusion, in believing the mask is your true face. So perhaps awakening is not about gaining anything new, but about losing what was never real. It's not about becoming enlightened, but about realizing there was never anyone to become enlightened in the first place. What remains when the illusion fades is something utterly simple. Awareness aware of itself. Silent, boundless, and free. If that's true, then maybe the question, who am I, has only one real answer. You are not the thinker, not the doer, not the dreamer, or the dreamed. You are the space in which all of it appears. You are the awareness that watches the rise and fall of worlds. And you have been here all along. When we think about consciousness, most of us assume it is stable, continuous, and tied to our physical body. We wake, we live, we sleep, we dream, and through it all, we trust the mind to maintain its narrative of who we are. But the more science investigates, the more it becomes clear that this stability is a fragile construction. Consciousness, it seems, is not a single, unified entity. but a dynamic system, constantly assembling itself from billions of neural signals. The self, the I that feels so solid and certain, is nothing more than the emergent product of these interactions. This is what makes near-death experiences so compelling. When the body is under extreme stress, when oxygen levels plummet, the heart stops, and brain activity collapses, some people report leaving their bodies entirely. They float above the operating table, observing their own forms with perfect clarity. They move through tunnels of light, encounter beings of overwhelming love, or are transported to worlds of vivid, ineffable geometry. And yet, in those moments, their brain shows no measurable activity. According to modern neuroscience, there should be no consciousness at all. And yet, the experience is reported with the same, sometimes even greater, intensity as ordinary life. Consider the case of Pam Reynolds. In 1991, she underwent a highly experimental surgery to repair a massive aneurysm in her brain. To perform the operation, surgeons had to cool her body to 60 degrees Fahrenheit, drain her blood, and stop her heart completely. Electrodes measured her brain activity, which fell to a flat line. By every conventional measure, she was clinically dead. But when she later recounted her experience, she described leaving her body and floating above the surgical table. She could see details of instruments, overhear conversations, and even accurately describe medical procedures she had no way of witnessing. The clarity of her perception during complete brain inactivity is one of the most well-documented near-death experiences in history. Cases like hers challenge the assumption that consciousness is an emergent property of the brain. If the brain produces awareness, how can awareness continue when the brain is silent? One possibility is that consciousness is more fundamental than matter, that the brain does not create it, but channels it. In this view, the neural machinery in the skull acts like a radio, tuning into a vast underlying awareness and translating it into a form we can perceive. When the radio fails, the signal doesn't disappear. It simply returns to its source. The implications are staggering. They suggest that what we call death may not be the end of experience, but the cessation of a particular mode of filtering consciousness. In the same way that a projector requires light and a screen to display a film, the body and brain may only allow consciousness to appear in a structured, limited form. When that system shuts down, the consciousness that was appearing through it may continue to exist, free from the constraints of form and time. This perspective is supported by studies of psychedelic experiences, particularly those induced by substances like DMT. Dimethyltryptamine, a naturally occurring compound found in the human brain, can trigger experiences remarkably similar to near-death encounters. People report leaving their bodies, entering fully realized alien worlds, and encountering beings that communicate intelligence and wisdom beyond words. The vividness and consistency of these experiences across individuals and cultures are difficult to dismiss as mere hallucination. Brain imaging shows that psychedelics do not simply increase activity, they reorganize it entirely. Networks that usually operate independently begin to communicate in new ways, producing a hyper-connected, hyper-real perception of reality. The common thread between near-death experiences and DMT journeys is the dissolution of the self. In both cases, the boundaries that define who we are, where our body ends and the world begins, begin to fade. People report a profound sense of unity with all things, a sense of timelessness, and the realization that identity is a temporary, constructed phenomenon. The feeling of being behind your eyes, observing the world from a single point in space, is no longer absolute. Consciousness seems to expand, becoming something far larger than the body that houses it. Even outside extreme states, our everyday sense of self is precarious. Simple disruptions in the brain can fracture the self model. Neuroscientist Olaf Blanke demonstrated this with his experiments on the temporoparietal junction. Mild electrical stimulation in this area could reliably induce out-of-body experiences, allowing patients to perceive themselves from above. To the patient, the experience felt as real, or even more real, than ordinary life. The illusion of being located within the body is not fixed. It is a construction maintained by neural activity. When that activity shifts, the self shifts with it. Consciousness is even more fragile than that. In split-brain patients, where the corpus callosum connecting the two hemispheres is severed, two distinct streams of awareness can exist simultaneously in a single skull. Each hemisphere can perceive, act, and even intend independently. The left hemisphere might answer a question while the right hemisphere performs contradictory actions, unaware of the left's decisions. These patients live with two minds in one body, yet the illusion of a singular, continuous self persists until carefully tested. These findings highlight the flexibility and modularity of consciousness. The I we cling to is neither indivisible nor permanent. It can fracture, relocate, multiply, or dissolve entirely. Yet the awareness that underlies it remains constant, intact, and expansive. We rarely notice this because the brain is exquisitely skilled at constructing a coherent narrative. It stitches together sensory input, memories, emotions, and intentions to produce the convincing story of a single, continuous self. But when that story is disrupted, the raw structure of consciousness becomes visible. Near-death experiences also reveal another astonishing feature. Consciousness can perceive events beyond the physical reach of the body. In studies like those conducted by Dutch cardiologist Pim van Lommel, patients who were clinically dead reported accurate details of medical procedures, conversations between staff, and events occurring in other rooms. Some even returned with new insights, languages, or knowledge they could not have learned through ordinary means. From a strictly materialist perspective, these reports are difficult to explain. They suggest that consciousness is not limited to sensory input processed by the brain, but may access a wider field of information. Religious traditions have long acknowledged this. The Tibetan concept of the bardo describes intermediate states between death and rebirth, during which consciousness continues to exist beyond the physical body. Egyptian texts speak of journeys through tunnels of light toward divine beings. Across cultures, the patterns are remarkably similar: an awareness that transcends the body, experiences of love and understanding, and a return with insights that are often transformative. This convergence of mystical insight and scientific observation points to a profound possibility. Consciousness may be a fundamental aspect of reality, woven into the very fabric of existence. Rather than emerging from matter, it may precede it, with the brain acting as a temporary conduit. When that conduit fails, consciousness does not disappear. It reveals its true nature, vast, flexible, and unbound. These revelations have practical implications for how we live. Understanding that the self is a construction can alter our relationship with fear, suffering, and impermanence. If the I is a temporary narrative, the anxieties, regrets, and desires attached to it lose their ultimate weight. Death ceases to be an enemy and becomes a natural transition. Loss becomes less absolute, as the awareness that underlies all experience remains untouched. This insight can also deepen our sense of connection. If the self is not a fixed entity, then boundaries between individuals are less rigid than they appear. Empathy, compassion, and love are not just social conventions. They are natural expressions of an awareness that is not truly separate. Every interaction becomes an opportunity to recognize the unity underlying apparent multiplicity. At the same time, consciousness remains mysterious. Even with decades of research into the brain, psychedelics, and near-death phenomena, the ultimate source of awareness remains elusive. How can a flatline brain perceive events? Why do DMT visions manifest with such consistency across cultures? Why does the self feel so real, even though it is constructed? Science provides glimpses, but not answers. Perhaps the greatest challenge is reconciling the everyday experience of self with the glimpses of unbounded awareness. Most people live entirely within the illusion, never questioning its reality. Yet those who do investigate, through meditation, psychedelics, or extraordinary experiences, encounter something profound. A recognition that the self is both real and unreal, that consciousness is both personal and universal, that life is both finite and infinite. These paradoxes are not meant to be solved with logic alone. They are to be experienced, observed, and reflected upon. Consciousness may not conform to the expectations of materialism or classical physics. It may exist in ways that transcend ordinary measurement, operating in dimensions we cannot yet fully comprehend. What is remarkable is that all of this is happening within you right now. The awareness that reads these words is the same awareness that has witnessed your entire life, moment by moment. It is the same awareness that perceives near-death experiences, DMT visions, and meditative dissolution. It is the foundation upon which all experiences arise. Every thought you have about yourself, every sensation, every emotion, every memory is like a ripple on the surface of that awareness. The wave is transient, but the water remains. You can forget the water exists because you are caught up in the wave, but it is always there. And the more you allow yourself to notice it, the more you begin to see that nothing in experience ever truly disappears. Even fear, which grips us so tightly, can be transformed. Fear of death, fear of loss, fear of impermanence, all of these arise because of attachment to the illusion of a separate self. When that illusion softens, fear loses its power. Awareness has nothing to lose. It is not threatened by change. And in that freedom, there is a profound peace, a stillness that persists regardless of circumstance. Ultimately, part 4 of this journey is an invitation. It is an invitation to look beyond the familiar narrative of self and explore the vastness that underlies it, to notice the spaces between thoughts, the silence behind perception, and the continuity that persists when the self momentarily dissolves. It is a call to witness awareness itself, without judgment, without expectation, and without clinging. The implications ripple outward. If consciousness is fundamental, if the self is a construct, if awareness persists beyond the body, then life, death, and identity take on entirely new meaning. The universe is not separate from you. You are not separate from the universe. And the awareness you experience now is both deeply personal and endlessly expansive. These are not abstract ideas. They are truths you can begin to explore directly in your own experience. By observing, reflecting, and noticing the nature of your own awareness, you touch the same reality you glimpse in near-death experiences, deep meditation, and psychedelic exploration. The subtle realization that yourself is a construct and awareness is the ground of experience can transform the way you perceive every moment of your life. Even ordinary moments carry extraordinary significance once this perspective is considered. The sound of the wind, the warmth of sunlight, the laughter of a loved one, these are no longer simple sensory events. They are manifestations of the infinite field of consciousness through which you move. Every sensation, every emotion, every thought is an opportunity to witness the vastness that underlies it. You are not merely experiencing life. Life is experiencing itself through you. The challenge lies in integrating this awareness into everyday existence. Most of us are habituated to living entirely within the narrative of self. Work, social expectations, responsibilities, and routines constantly reinforce the illusion of separateness. To notice consciousness as it truly is requires moments of stillness, attention, and presence. Meditation, deep reflection, and mindful awareness are not mere practices. They are doors through which you can access the deeper nature of your own mind. One of the most profound realizations that comes from this inquiry is the impermanence of the self. Just as the wave arises from and returns to the ocean, the self is always emerging and dissolving within awareness. Birth, growth, decay, and death are part of the same flow. And yet, despite its impermanence, the self is essential, not because it is real in an absolute sense, but because it provides a focus through which consciousness can experience itself. The temporary eye allows the infinite to explore the finite. The interplay between permanence and impermanence is at the heart of human experience. Our bodies age, our memories fade, our relationships shift, yet the awareness in which all of these appear remains unchanged. This awareness witnesses the passing of time, the rise and fall of events, the endless cycles of creation and dissolution. It is neither bound by the past nor worried about the future. It simply observes, infinitely present. Scientific studies reinforce this idea in subtle ways. Brain imaging of people meditating for long periods shows decreased activity in the default mode network, the system responsible for maintaining a sense of a separate self. Experienced meditators report a dissolving of the boundaries between self and world, a profound sense of unity, and the experience of timeless awareness. These experiences are not rare anomalies. They are accessible to anyone who practices deep attention and reflection. Psychedelic research tells a similar story. Substances like psilocybin and LSD temporarily suppress the default mode network, allowing consciousness to expand beyond the constraints of self. People report profound mystical experiences, ego dissolution, and the sensation of merging with an infinite field of awareness. These states often produce lasting changes in perception, behavior, and well-being. They reveal that the mind's construction of the self is not fixed, but flexible and responsive to shifts in perception and neural activity. Near-death experiences, meditation, and psychedelics converge on the same truth. The self is a temporary pattern, while awareness is enduring and unbounded. This realization can reshape how we approach life. Fear of death diminishes because awareness persists beyond the body. Compassion deepens because the boundaries between self and other are seen as permeable. Gratitude expands because every moment is recognized as a direct encounter with the infinite. Yet this insight is not simply intellectual. It must be experienced. The mind can theorize about awareness, ego dissolution, and the nature of consciousness endlessly. But without direct experience, these ideas remain abstract. The key is to notice the quality of experience itself, the constant witnessing of thoughts, sensations, and emotions. To see that the observer is not the observed, that awareness exists prior to the self, and that this awareness is present now, in this moment, without needing anything outside itself. The deeper you explore this, the more you encounter paradoxes. Consciousness is both personal and universal, finite and infinite, ever-changing and eternal. The self is both real in practical terms and illusory in absolute terms. Time appears to flow, yet awareness is timeless. These paradoxes are not problems to be solved. They are invitations to experience life in a way that transcends ordinary dualistic thinking. Philosophically, this perspective aligns with non-dual traditions across cultures. In Advaita Vedanta, the self is an illusion superimposed on the eternal, unchanging consciousness, Brahman. In Zen Buddhism, the realization of no self dissolves suffering and attachment, revealing the world as it truly is. In mysticism, the soul is described as merging with divine awareness, recognizing its oneness with all existence. Modern neuroscience and psychology, when interpreted through these lenses, may be converging on the same fundamental truth. The question remains, why does the brain construct the self in the first place? Evolutionarily, it makes sense. A coherent sense of identity allows planning, decision-making, social interaction, and survival. The illusion of separateness is adaptive. Without it, navigating the physical world would be nearly impossible. Yet, as with all illusions, there is a cost. Attachment to the self produces fear, desire, suffering, and the feeling of isolation. The key is not to destroy the self, but to recognize it as a temporary construct, a tool for consciousness, not the essence of consciousness itself. This awareness of awareness changes how we experience life. Every moment becomes more immediate, more vivid, more alive. Ordinary events, walking, eating, listening, touching, carry a depth that is usually overlooked. When the lens of the self softens, the richness of experience becomes apparent. Awareness is no longer contained within a point in space. It expands outward, encompassing everything without distinction. The most profound insights often arise in moments of extreme intensity. People report ego dissolution and encounters with infinite awareness during deep trauma, intense grief, or life-threatening experiences. Yet these experiences can also be cultivated through meditation, contemplation, and mindful attention. The doorway is always present, even in ordinary life. The challenge is to notice it, to lean into the quiet spaces between thoughts, and to observe the self without identification. Part 4 of this journey emphasizes that consciousness is not confined to the body, nor is it a product of the brain alone. Awareness is fundamental, the ground from which all experience arises. The self, while compelling, is a temporary, flexible construct. The dissolution of the self reveals the true nature of consciousness, vast, unbounded, and intimately present in every moment. As we explore further, we begin to see that this insight is not merely academic or philosophical. It has practical implications for living. By understanding the constructed nature of the self, we can navigate life with less fear, more clarity, and greater compassion. We can approach death not with dread, but with acceptance. We can experience relationships not as attachments to separate entities, but as encounters between expressions of the same underlying awareness. The world itself begins to appear differently. Nature, people, art, music, and even the passing of time are no longer separate phenomena. They are all expressions of the same infinite consciousness in which we participate. Awareness is not something contained by the mind. It is the very ground of existence, manifesting as all phenomena. This perspective invites a radical rethinking of identity, mortality, and purpose. It suggests that what we call life is a brief manifestation of an eternal process. Death is not annihilation, but a transition. The self is not the end, nor is it the beginning. It is a temporary configuration within the larger field of awareness. And this field is the only true constant. Every thought, every perception, every memory you have ever experienced is like a ripple on the surface of this vast, infinite awareness. The wave arises, moves, and disappears, but the ocean itself remains. And the more we attend to this awareness, the more we recognize its infinite scope, its unbroken continuity, and its intimate presence in every moment of life. Ultimately, the message is simple. The self is a story. Awareness is the reality. Life is the experience of that awareness manifesting through countless forms, including our own. The deeper we explore this, the more profoundly our understanding of existence transforms. We are not separate observers in a universe of things. We are the universe experiencing itself through countless eyes, countless forms, countless moments of awareness. As we continue this journey into consciousness, it becomes clear that the self is not only an illusion, but also a remarkably adaptable construction. The brain maintains this illusion through constant feedback from the senses, memory, and emotion. Every second, millions of signals flow through the nervous system, informing the mind of its place in space, the position of the body, and the continuity of personal identity. The sense of being inside the body is something we take for granted, but it is, in fact, an achievement, the result of a highly complex and delicate neural dance that can be disrupted in ways both subtle and profound. Experiments in neuroscience have demonstrated this fragility repeatedly. Electrical stimulation of specific brain regions can produce the experience of leaving the body entirely. In Olaf Blanke's studies, activating the temporoparietal junction of epilepsy patients induced out-of-body experiences with startling clarity. Patients reported floating above their own bodies, seeing the medical staff, observing surgical instruments, and even describing events they could not have perceived from their physical location. The brain, it seems, creates not only the self, but also the sense of location and perspective, the point behind the eyes, from which all experience seems to radiate. This realization forces us to reconsider what it means to be alive. The self is often assumed to be fixed and continuous, yet it can be relocated, fractured, or even multiplied. Split-brain patients, studied extensively by Roger Sperry and Michael Gazzaniga, reveal that consciousness can exist in parallel within a single skull. When the corpus callosum is severed, the two hemispheres no longer communicate effectively. Each hemisphere can perceive, decide, and act independently. In some cases, one hand might button a shirt while the other unbuttons it, or one hemisphere might claim a desire that the other does not share. Two conscious entities coexist within one body, each convinced of its own reality, challenging the notion of a singular, unified self. If consciousness can split and relocate with relative ease, what does this imply about the experiences of people under extreme conditions? Near-death experiences, psychedelic journeys, and moments of intense meditation suggest that consciousness is not bound to the body at all. It can expand, contract, and transcend the physical confines of the skull. DMT, a naturally occurring neurotransmitter, provides a particularly compelling example. Inhaling a small dose can propel a person into fully realized, complex environments populated by entities that feel alive and intelligent. Some of these beings, often described as machine elves or geometric intelligences, convey knowledge that feels alien yet coherent, transcending ordinary understanding. Brain imaging during these experiences reveals a profound reorganization of neural activity. Networks that typically operate independently begin to communicate. Sensory regions that normally remain separate merge, allowing vision, hearing, and emotion to overlap in novel ways. The default mode network, responsible for maintaining the sense of a coherent, separate self, quiets dramatically. The boundaries that usually define personal identity dissolve, leaving a direct experience of pure awareness. This is not simply hallucination. It is a glimpse into the underlying architecture of consciousness itself. Even in ordinary life, the mind provides hints of its constructed nature. Lucid dreams, for example, reveal that the self can exist in a state where the usual rules of space and time no longer apply. In dreams, we can inhabit forms entirely unlike our waking body, perform feats impossible in physical reality, and experience worlds that feel convincingly real. Yet, upon waking, the brain seamlessly reintegrates the self into its familiar body and environment, hiding the malleability of consciousness from everyday awareness. The brain's ability to construct reality becomes even more astonishing when considering cases like that of Pam Reynolds. During her hypothermic cardiac arrest, all brain activity ceased. By every clinical measure, she was dead. Yet she reported a full, vivid awareness of events occurring during her flatlined state. She accurately described surgical instruments, conversations, and procedures that she could not have perceived through ordinary sensory means. Her experience defies the assumption that consciousness emerges solely from neural activity, suggesting instead that awareness may be a fundamental aspect of reality that can operate independently of the brain. This leads to one of the most profound and challenging questions. If consciousness exists independently, what exactly is the role of the brain? Neuroscience suggests that the brain functions as a filter or amplifier. It channels the vast field of awareness, organizing it into the coherent experience of a self situated in a physical body. When the brain is damaged, altered, or temporarily silenced, consciousness can still exist, but its usual form changes. The brain does not generate awareness. It shapes it, giving it structure, focus, and continuity. From a philosophical perspective, this reframes our understanding of life, death, and identity. Death may not be the cessation of consciousness, but the end of a particular mode of manifestation. Consciousness, untethered from the body, may continue to exist in ways that are currently unimaginable. This idea is not purely speculative. It is reflected in reports of verified perceptions during clinical death. Individuals have observed events, instruments, and conversations that they could not have perceived through normal sensory channels. These accounts challenge the strict materialist model, suggesting that awareness has a scope beyond the body. Religious and mystical traditions have long explored this concept. Tibetan Buddhism describes the bardo, the intermediate state between death and rebirth, in which consciousness continues to experience vivid phenomena. Egyptian texts speak of the journey of the soul through tunnels of light toward divine realms. Across cultures, reports of near-death experiences share remarkable consistency. Encounters with beings of light, a sense of returning with knowledge or insight, and an overwhelming experience of love and unity. These experiences, though interpreted differently across traditions, point to a shared phenomenology that transcends individual culture or belief. The consistency of these reports raises fascinating questions about the nature of reality. If consciousness is indeed fundamental, then what we experience as the physical world may be a filtered or organized projection of a larger field of awareness. The brain, acting as a tuning device, allows consciousness to perceive a stable, coherent reality. Disrupt the tuning through trauma, psychedelics, or extreme physiological stress, and the structure of experience changes dramatically. The self can fracture, relocate, or dissolve entirely. Consider for a moment the implications of this view. The sense of being a separate self with clear boundaries is not a given. It is a construction maintained by neural activity, social conditioning, and cultural narratives. Your memories, personality, and sense of agency are all integrated into this construct. Yet underneath, there is a continuous field of awareness, unbound by space, time, or individual identity. This field is the same awareness that perceives the rise and fall of stars, the flow of rivers, and the experiences of other beings. It is the canvas upon which the story of life is painted. Meditative practices offer a way to glimpse this reality directly. In deep states of concentration, the usual sense of self softens. Thoughts continue to arise, sensations continue to occur, but the observer is no longer identified with any of them. Awareness becomes its own object, luminous and unchanging, even as the mind fluctuates. This state, often described as non-dual consciousness, reveals the essential truth that self and world are not separate. The mind's narrative may create the illusion of separation, but awareness itself is always unified. Psychedelic experiences provide a similar window. By temporarily altering the activity of neural networks, substances like psilocybin, LSD, and DMT dissolve the boundaries of the self. People report merging with infinite consciousness, experiencing life as a continuum of awareness, and encountering entities or structures that communicate intelligence beyond ordinary perception. These states are not mere escapism. They are glimpses of the same underlying reality hinted at in meditation, near-death experiences, and subtle shifts in perception. The fragility and malleability of the self underscore the astonishing adaptability of consciousness. It can fracture into multiple streams, relocate outside the body, or dissolve entirely into pure awareness. Yet despite these changes, awareness remains. The observer persists even when the observed is altered, showing that consciousness is not reducible to neural activity alone. It is a phenomenon with its own structure, rules, and potential. Understanding this changes how we perceive life. Fear of death, loss, and impermanence loses its intensity when the self is seen as a temporary construct. Awareness is never threatened, never diminished, and never confined. Suffering becomes less absolute because the observer of suffering is unchanging. Love, joy, and beauty become more profound because they are experienced directly, without being filtered through the narrow lens of ego. We begin to encounter its most mysterious quality, its ability to experience realities that appear entirely independent of the physical world. Ordinary perception suggests that the mind is tethered to the body, that awareness arises from the firing of neurons, and that reality is strictly what we see, hear, and touch. Yet the evidence from near-death experiences, psychedelics, and neurological studies challenges these assumptions, revealing a mind far more expansive, flexible, and mysterious than previously imagined. Time, for example, is one of the most fundamental aspects of our experience, and yet it is also one of the most malleable. In ordinary waking life, we perceive time as linear, a steady progression from past to future. The brain constructs this perception by integrating sensory input, memory, and prediction. But under extreme conditions, this perception can warp dramatically. During near-death experiences, people often report that time seems to slow, expand, or even dissolve entirely. A single moment can contain a lifetime of experience. A brief instant can stretch into eternity, and past, present, and future appear simultaneously. Consciousness, unbound by the usual neural constraints, experiences time as a flexible, fluid phenomenon, rather than a fixed sequence. Psychedelics provide another glimpse into this phenomenon. Substances like DMT, psilocybin, and LSD alter neural activity in ways that disrupt the brain's normal sense of temporal continuity. People report entering realms where time does not exist, where events unfold in patterns beyond linear comprehension. Past, present, and future seem to coexist, and experiences occur in a multi-dimensional flow rather than a sequence of discrete moments. In these states, consciousness is not constrained by clocks or calendars. It perceives reality as an interconnected, ongoing process where cause and effect are experienced as patterns rather than sequences. The brain itself contributes to this illusion of linear time. Neuroscience suggests that the default mode network and other large-scale neural circuits create the sense of a continuous self moving through a temporal world. These networks integrate sensory input, memory, and prediction to produce the feeling of being a persistent entity in a flowing timeline. When these networks are disrupted by trauma, meditation, psychedelics, or disease, the perception of time becomes malleable. People may experience hours as minutes, minutes as hours, or moments that feel infinite. The implication is profound. The experience of time is not absolute. It is constructed by the mind. and consciousness can perceive reality outside its usual temporal constraints. Spatial perception is equally constructed. The mind maps the body and environment through a process called body schema, integrating input from the eyes, inner ear, muscles, and skin. This continuous map allows us to navigate the world with confidence, giving the illusion that we occupy a stable location in space. Yet experiments with electrical stimulation, virtual reality, and sensory deprivation reveal that this sense of location is highly flexible. The temporoparietal junction, in particular, is critical for maintaining the sense of self in space. When it is disrupted, the self can shift outside the body, creating vivid out-of-body experiences. Patients describe floating above themselves, observing events from impossible perspectives, and perceiving their environment with astonishing clarity. The implications of these findings extend far beyond neuroscience. They suggest that consciousness is not inherently bound to space or time in the way we typically assume. Instead, the brain creates a framework for perception, providing a coherent model of reality that allows for survival and interaction. When this framework is altered, consciousness can access states that feel real but defy the ordinary constraints of physical existence. This reveals a remarkable truth. The mind is capable of perceiving realities that may exist independently of the physical body, suggesting a potential continuity of awareness beyond the brain. Near-death experiences provide some of the clearest examples of this phenomenon. Consider Anita Moorjani, who, during a terminal illness, reported leaving her body and entering a realm of infinite understanding and unconditional love. She experienced a reality in which all distinctions, fears, and limitations dissolved. She was aware of the interconnectedness of all things, and in that state, she perceived information about her own illness and recovery that was later verified medically. Her body healed in ways that defied conventional explanation, suggesting a link between consciousness and physical processes that remains poorly understood. This link between consciousness and the physical world is further illustrated by studies of verified perceptions during clinical death. Patients have reported observing surgical instruments, conversations, and events occurring in other rooms while their brain activity was flatlined. These experiences cannot be easily dismissed as hallucinations or confabulations. They suggest that consciousness is capable of perceiving information beyond the sensory and neural capacities of the body. The idea that the mind can access a broader field of reality challenges our assumptions about the limits of perception and the nature of existence itself. Psychedelics, meditation, and near-death experiences converge in revealing the flexibility and depth of consciousness. Each approach demonstrates that the self is not a fixed entity, but a temporary pattern maintained by neural activity. Disrupt the pattern, and consciousness can relocate, dissolve, or expand. The sense of self as a singular, continuous entity is revealed to be a construct, while the underlying awareness remains constant, unbound, and perceptive. Even in ordinary life, moments of extreme focus, awe, or wonder provide a glimpse of this flexibility. Standing before a vast landscape, watching a storm roll across the mountains, or witnessing the birth of a child can temporarily dissolve the boundaries of self. Time seems to slow, the mind expands, and awareness feels larger than the individual. These ordinary experiences mirror, in miniature, the extraordinary states induced by meditation, psychedelics, and near-death experiences, suggesting that consciousness has an inherent capacity for expansion that is always present, if only we notice it. Scientific studies continue to probe the limits of this awareness. Brain imaging shows that during deep meditation or psychedelic experiences, regions that normally remain separate begin to communicate, creating a hyper-connected state. Sensory areas merge, integrating vision, hearing, and emotion. Memory and logic blend with sensation, producing perceptions that are both coherent and radically novel. The default mode network quiets, dissolving the boundaries of the self and allowing the mind to access patterns of information and experience that are usually filtered out. This reveals a fundamental truth. The self is not the source of consciousness. It is a temporary configuration, a lens through which awareness is focused. The brain constructs this lens to navigate the world, but it is not consciousness itself. Awareness exists independently, capable of perceiving beyond the body, beyond space, and beyond time. The self is a narrative, a story, a framework, but the observer of that story is unchanging, continuous, and vast. Understanding this has profound implications for life, death, and identity. If consciousness is fundamental, then death may not be the end of experience. It may represent the dissolution of the self while awareness continues. Near-death experiences, psychedelic journeys, and meditative states provide glimpses of this continuity, showing that awareness is not extinguished when the body fails. Instead, it can persist, perceive, and even influence the physical world in ways that remain mysterious. This perspective also reshapes how we understand suffering and fear. The anxieties associated with mortality, loss, and impermanence arise from attachment to the self. When the self is seen as a temporary construct, these fears lose their absolute power. Awareness itself is never threatened, never diminished, and never confined. The mind may experience challenges, pain, and loss, but the observer of these events remains untouched, revealing a profound resilience and equanimity that transcends the ordinary narrative of self. At the same time, this understanding deepens our capacity for compassion and empathy. Recognizing the constructed nature of self highlights the shared awareness underlying all beings. The boundaries between self and other are not absolute. They are malleable, flexible, and permeable. Every encounter, every interaction, every relationship becomes an opportunity to perceive the same awareness in others, to connect with the fundamental essence of life itself. Philosophically, this aligns with non-dual traditions across cultures. In Advaita Vedanta, the self is considered an illusion imposed upon Brahman, the unchanging awareness that underlies all phenomena. In Zen Buddhism, realization of no self reveals the unity of all experience, dissolving attachment and suffering. Mystical traditions speak of merging with divine consciousness, experiencing love and understanding beyond ordinary comprehension. Modern neuroscience and psychology, when interpreted through this lens, appear to converge on the same essential truth. Consciousness is fundamental, the self is constructed, and awareness is vast, unbounded, and ever-present. Even as we explore these extraordinary states, the ordinary mind provides a constant reminder of the construct. Memories, thoughts, emotions, and perceptions continuously reinforce the sense of self, giving the impression of a coherent, unified identity. Yet this is an illusion, a narrative maintained by the brain. Awareness itself is not bound by this narrative. It is flexible, expansive, and capable of perceiving beyond the limits of the constructed self. This realization invites a radical rethinking of life. To live fully is not simply to navigate the world as a separate self, but to recognize the underlying awareness in which all experiences arise. To notice that thoughts, emotions, and perceptions are temporary waves on the surface of consciousness, while the observer remains constant. To see that the boundaries between self and world, subject and object, are not fixed, but permeable. In this expanded understanding, death loses its absolute meaning, suffering becomes less binding, and life is experienced with greater depth, clarity, and richness. Consciousness is not a product of the brain, it is the ground of all experience. The self is a story, a temporary configuration, a lens through which awareness is focused. When that lens dissolves, awareness remains, infinite, continuous, and perceptive. As we approach the final layers of this exploration, it becomes increasingly clear that consciousness is not simply an emergent property of the brain, but a phenomenon with remarkable depth and independence. Near-death experiences, psychedelic journeys, meditation, and neurological experiments all converge on a single insight. The self is a temporary construct, while awareness is fundamental, unbounded, and persistent. The self is the lens through which consciousness perceives the world, yet the lens itself is not the observer. Awareness exists before the self, beyond the self, and independent of the self. One of the most compelling aspects of this realization is how it reshapes our understanding of identity. Identity is typically thought of as continuous and fixed. Memories, personality traits, desires, and social roles create a coherent narrative that gives the impression of a singular, enduring self. Yet neurological studies, particularly those involving out-of-body experiences and split-brain patients, reveal that identity is flexible, malleable, and divisible. In split-brain patients, each hemisphere may act independently, make decisions, and even express different desires. Each self within the brain operates with its own sense of reality, unaware of the other's choices. This demonstrates that the unified self we experience is not absolute. It is a carefully maintained construct, coordinated by neural networks that integrate perception, memory, and decision-making. The implications of this are profound. If identity is constructed, then the rigid sense of I that we cling to is not the totality of our being. It is a temporary configuration, a necessary framework for navigating the physical world, but not the essence of awareness itself. Consciousness can exist beyond this identity, capable of perceiving reality without reference to personal narrative or egoic boundaries. This insight is echoed in the reports of individuals who have experienced ego dissolution through meditation, psychedelics, or near-death events. They describe a state of pure awareness in which the self fades, yet perception, understanding, and profound emotion remain intact. Consider the phenomenon of near-death experiences in this context. Individuals report leaving their bodies, moving through tunnels of light, and encountering beings of overwhelming love and intelligence. These experiences are accompanied by a profound sense of continuity and lucidity, even in states where the brain should be incapable of generating coherent perception. Patients such as Pam Reynolds and Anita Morjani describe accurate observations, verified details, and transformative insights that occur while their brains are flatlined or severely compromised. From a materialist perspective, these accounts defy explanation, yet from the perspective of fundamental consciousness, they reveal the mind's capacity to operate beyond the usual constraints of space, time, and identity. Psychedelic experiences offer a complementary perspective. Substances like DMT, psilocybin, and LSD temporarily alter neural activity, disrupting the default mode network responsible for maintaining the sense of a coherent self. In these states, individuals often report merging with infinite consciousness, perceiving complex geometric patterns, intelligent beings, or alternate realms that feel as real as the waking world. These experiences challenge the notion that perception is strictly limited to the physical senses. Instead, consciousness appears capable of exploring a broader spectrum of reality, one that may operate according to principles beyond ordinary human understanding. Meditation provides a more controlled yet equally revealing window into the nature of awareness. Long-term practitioners report dissolving the boundaries between self and environment, experiencing states of pure, unmediated awareness. Thoughts, emotions, and sensations continue to arise, yet the observer is no longer identified with them. awareness becomes self-luminous, capable of witnessing the unfolding of reality without attachment or interpretation. In these states, the illusion of separation falls away, and the mind perceives directly the interconnectedness of all phenomena. The convergence of these insights suggests that consciousness is not generated by the brain, but rather organized, filtered, and focused through it. The brain acts as a kind of tuner or amplifier, allowing awareness to interact with the physical world in a coherent, structured manner. When the tuning is disrupted, whether by electrical stimulation, trauma, psychedelic substances, or deep meditation, the patterns of perception change dramatically. The self may fracture, relocate, or dissolve entirely, revealing the underlying awareness that is unbound, continuous, and expansive. This perspective also invites us to reconsider the nature of death. If consciousness exists independently of the brain, then death may not represent the cessation of awareness, but the dissolution of the self's temporary framework. Near-death experiences suggest that awareness continues to perceive, comprehend, and even interact with reality in states where the physical body is no longer functional. The experiences of patients who report accurate observations, medical details, or previously unknown information while clinically dead challenge the assumption that consciousness is entirely dependent on neural activity. They point toward the possibility that awareness is fundamental, persistent, and not constrained by physical limitations. Identity, too, is transformed by this understanding. When the self is seen as a construct, attachment to ego, social roles, and personal narrative can be loosened. Fear of loss, failure, or death diminishes, because the observer is not bound by these transient phenomena. Compassion and empathy expand as the boundaries between self and other are recognized as flexible and permeable. Awareness is not limited to one individual. It is the ground from which all experience arises. By recognizing this, we begin to see the interconnectedness of life and the shared foundation of consciousness that underlies all beings. Scientific research continues to probe the extraordinary capabilities of consciousness. Functional MRI and EEG studies show that during ego dissolution or altered states, neural networks reorganize, sensory regions communicate in novel ways, and the usual filtering mechanisms relax. Memory, perception, and emotion can merge, creating experiences that feel more real than ordinary reality. These states often produce profound insight, creativity, and transformative understanding. They reveal the capacity of the mind to access dimensions of awareness typically hidden from everyday perception. The implications extend beyond neuroscience. Philosophically, recognizing consciousness as fundamental challenges materialist assumptions about reality. If awareness exists independently, then the universe is not merely a collection of matter in motion, but a field of experience, perception, and intelligence. The brain, rather than generating consciousness, organizes it, allowing life to interact with reality in structured ways. This perspective aligns with certain interpretations in quantum physics, where observation appears to influence outcomes, and reality is understood not simply as matter, but as a web of possibilities experienced through awareness. At a personal level, this insight has profound consequences for living. Awareness can be trained, expanded, and refined through meditation, mindfulness, and contemplative practices. By recognizing the constructed nature of the self, we can engage with life more fully, respond to challenges with clarity, and cultivate deeper empathy and understanding. We can experience joy, love, and wonder without clinging to them, knowing that the observer persists beyond every transient event. The extraordinary experiences documented in near-death reports, psychedelic studies, and meditative traditions all point toward a common truth. Consciousness is not reducible to neurons, synapses, or electrical activity alone. It is a fundamental phenomenon capable of existing, perceiving, and interacting beyond the usual constraints of the physical body. The self, while compelling and necessary for practical purposes, is a temporary configuration, a lens through which awareness perceives the world. When the lens dissolves, awareness remains, infinite, continuous, and perceptive. These insights also challenge the way we approach questions of meaning, purpose, and morality. If consciousness is fundamental, then life is not merely a series of random events, but a field of experience, observation, and awareness. Every action, thought, and perception contributes to the unfolding of this awareness, shaping the quality and texture of reality. Ethical behavior, compassion, creativity, and love become not only personal choices, but expressions of a deeper awareness interacting with the world. Ultimately, Part 7 emphasizes the radical implications of recognizing consciousness as primary and the self as a construct. Time, space, identity, and life itself are experienced through the lens of the self, but awareness is not confined by these structures. It can relocate, expand, dissolve, and perceive realities beyond ordinary comprehension. Near-death experiences, psychedelic journeys, meditative states, and neurological experiments all converge on this insight, revealing a mind that is far more flexible, expansive, and fundamental than previously imagined. As we prepare to conclude this journey in Part 8, we will integrate these insights, exploring the full implications for our understanding of life, death, reality, and identity. We will consider how awareness shapes perception, how consciousness interacts with the physical world, and how recognizing the constructed nature of the self can transform the way we live, love, and experience existence. We will explore the profound possibility that what we call you is only a temporary configuration of something infinitely larger, something eternal, continuous, and intimately connected to all of reality. From neurological experiments to near-death experiences, from psychedelics to meditative states, the evidence points toward a profound truth. Consciousness is not confined to the brain, the body, or even ordinary perceptions of time and space. It is a fundamental aspect of reality, a continuous awareness that persists independently of the self, the body, and the limitations we usually assume. Understanding this requires a shift in perspective. Most of us navigate life believing that the self is fixed, continuous, and the ultimate center of experience. Memories, thoughts, emotions, and identity reinforce this impression. Yet neurological studies reveal that the self is fragile and malleable. Split-brain patients demonstrate that consciousness can exist in multiple streams within a single skull. Electrical stimulation can relocate awareness outside the body. Psychedelics can dissolve the boundaries of the self entirely. Near-death experiences show that awareness can continue when the brain shows no measurable activity. Together, these phenomena reveal that the sense of a unified, permanent self is an elaborate construction. It is a necessary one for navigating ordinary reality, but it is not the essence of consciousness itself. The temporoparietal junction, the corpus callosum, and other neural networks act as organizers of experience, providing a coherent sense of location, continuity, and identity. When these systems are disrupted, through trauma, altered states, or neurological intervention, consciousness is no longer constrained to the familiar point behind the eyes. Awareness can move, fracture, or expand, revealing the underlying continuity that is often obscured by the self. Out-of-body experiences, near-death phenomena, and psychedelic journeys all demonstrate that the mind can perceive realities that seem independent of the physical body. These experiences challenge the assumption that the brain generates consciousness. Instead, They suggest that the brain organizes and channels awareness, giving it form and structure, while the essence of awareness remains free and unbounded. Time and space, too, are constructs maintained by the brain. The perception of linear time, of cause and effect, and of a continuous here and now arises from neural integration of sensory input, memory, and prediction. Under extreme conditions, this perception becomes flexible. Near-death experiencers often report that time dilates, contracts, or dissolves altogether. A single moment can contain the richness of a lifetime, and past, present, and future may be experienced simultaneously. Psychedelic states reveal similar distortions, where time loses its linearity and events unfold in multidimensional patterns. Consciousness, when freed from ordinary neural constraints, experiences reality in ways that transcend the ordinary rules of physics. The self, identity, and ego are constructs that filter and focus awareness. They allow us to navigate the world efficiently, interact socially, and maintain a coherent narrative. Yet these constructs are temporary, flexible, and fragile. Meditation, psychedelics, and near-death experiences all demonstrate the impermanence of identity. The dissolution of the self is often accompanied by profound insights, expanded perception, and a sense of unity with the larger field of awareness. People describe merging with infinite consciousness, encountering entities of intelligence and love, and perceiving knowledge that transcends ordinary understanding. The mind, freed from the constraints of ego, reveals its inherent capacity for exploration, insight, and perception beyond the physical world. The implications of this understanding are staggering. Death may not represent the termination of awareness, but the end of a particular configuration of self. Near-death reports show that consciousness can continue to perceive, understand, and interact with reality when the brain is inactive. People have reported accurate observations of surgical procedures, conversations, and events occurring in other rooms while their bodies were clinically dead. Psychedelic journeys and deep meditative states reveal similar abilities to perceive realities beyond the constraints of ordinary perception. These findings challenge materialist assumptions and suggest that consciousness exists independently, capable of expansion, relocation, and transformation. Consider the emotional impact of this perspective. Fear of death, loss, and impermanence loses its intensity when the self is recognized as a construct rather than an absolute reality. Awareness itself persists, unbound and continuous. Suffering, while experienced, does not touch the observer of suffering. Joy, love, and wonder are not limited to fleeting moments but can be experienced directly through awareness itself. By recognizing the constructed nature of identity, we gain access to a deeper, more stable experience of life, one that is resilient in the face of impermanence and uncertainty. Consciousness also reveals the interconnectedness of life. When the boundaries between self and other dissolve, as they do in ego dissolution or profound meditative states, the sense of separateness falls away. Awareness perceives itself in all beings, recognizing the same underlying essence. This perspective fosters empathy, compassion, and a sense of unity with the cosmos. Every thought, action, and perception becomes part of a larger tapestry of awareness, highlighting the shared foundation of experience that connects all living beings. From a scientific perspective, this view reframes the role of the brain. The brain does not generate awareness, but organizes it, providing a framework through which consciousness can interact with the world. Neural networks integrate sensory input, memory, and prediction to create the coherent experience of a self situated in a body. When these networks are disrupted through injury, altered states, or trauma, the structure of perception changes, revealing the unbounded nature of consciousness. The brain acts as both a lens and a filter, shaping experience while never truly producing awareness itself. Philosophically, this aligns with ancient wisdom. Non-dual traditions across cultures describe consciousness as fundamental and the self as an illusion. Advaita Vedanta speaks of Brahman, the unchanging awareness underlying all phenomena. Zen Buddhism emphasizes the realization of no self, revealing unity and interconnectedness. Mystical experiences, near-death phenomena, and modern neuroscience converge on a similar insight. Consciousness is primary and identity is constructed. The self is a temporary lens, but the observer behind it is infinite, continuous, and perceptive. Life itself becomes more meaningful in this context. Awareness, unbound by the self, time, or space, allows for deeper perception, greater empathy, and profound insight. Actions are no longer solely ego-driven, but become expressions of awareness interacting with the world. Creativity, compassion, love, and curiosity emerge naturally from this expanded perspective. Every experience, moment, and interaction contributes to the ongoing unfolding of awareness, creating a reality that is richer, more interconnected, and more alive than ordinary perception allows. Near-death experiences, in particular, offer glimpses of what may lie beyond physical death. Individuals report encountering beings of love and intelligence, passing through tunnels of light, and receiving knowledge that transforms their understanding of existence. The same patterns emerge across cultures, suggesting a shared phenomenology that transcends personal belief or cultural context. These experiences reveal that awareness persists, perceives, and interacts with reality in ways that defy conventional materialist explanations. They suggest that consciousness is not bound by neural activity, physical laws, or individual identity. Psychedelic experiences provide parallel insights. DMT, psilocybin, and LSD dissolve the boundaries of the self, allowing individuals to perceive complex, intelligent realms beyond ordinary perception. These experiences are often described as more vivid and coherent than waking reality, with encounters that feel deeply meaningful and transformative. The default mode network quiets, sensory regions merge, and the mind explores patterns of perception normally inaccessible. Consciousness demonstrates its flexibility, adaptability, and fundamental independence from the structures of the brain. Meditation, too, provides a path to direct insight. Deep practice allows the dissolution of ego, the softening of identity, and the experience of pure awareness. Thoughts, sensations, and perceptions continue to arise, yet the observer remains unchanging. Awareness becomes luminous, capable of perceiving reality without the distortions imposed by self-centered narratives. This non-dual perspective reveals that consciousness is not produced by the brain, but exists independently, interacting with the world through temporary, constructed forms. In integrating these insights, one begins to see that life, death, identity, and reality are not fixed or absolute. They are phenomena perceived through the lens of the self, shaped by neural activity, memory, and culture. Awareness, however, is not confined by these constructs. It can relocate, expand, dissolve, and perceive realities beyond ordinary comprehension. Consciousness is not an emergent property, but a fundamental aspect of existence, the foundation upon which all experience arises. This perspective transforms how we live. Recognizing the constructed nature of the self allows for freedom, clarity, and resilience. Fear of death diminishes, suffering becomes less binding, and love, compassion, and joy can be experienced more directly. Awareness persists, unbound and continuous, capable of perceiving, understanding, and interacting with reality in ways that transcend ordinary perception. The self is a temporary lens, but the observer behind it is eternal, infinite, and intimate with the cosmos. Ultimately, Part 8 emphasizes the profound possibilities inherent in consciousness. The mind is not limited to the physical body, the flow of time, or the boundaries of identity. Awareness exists before the self, beyond the self, and independent of the self. It can relocate, expand, dissolve, and perceive realities beyond ordinary comprehension. Near-death experiences, psychedelics, meditation, and neuroscience all point to the same insight. Consciousness is fundamental. Identity is constructed, and the observer is vast, continuous, and unbounded. As we conclude this journey, take a moment to reflect. The reality you experience, the sense of being behind your eyes, and the continuity of yourself are all achievements of your brain. Yet they are not the essence of awareness. Consciousness exists beyond these constructs. It is the ground of all experience, the witness of life, and the source of understanding, love, and creativity. Every moment you perceive, every thought you have, and every experience you live is filtered through the lens of the self. But the observer is infinite, unbounded, and eternal. Life, in this understanding, becomes an exploration of awareness itself. Fear, attachment, and suffering are recognized as temporary, while love, insight, and understanding emerge naturally from the recognition of consciousness as primary. Identity is a tool, a narrative, and a lens, but not the totality of existence. Awareness continues, beyond body, beyond mind, and beyond life. It is vast, eternal, and intimately connected to all that exists. Through this perspective, death loses its absolute terror, life gains extraordinary depth, and the boundaries of self and other time and space dissolve into the continuity of awareness. Consciousness is fundamental, the self is a story, and the observer, the awareness that underlies all experience, is infinite. It has always existed, it persists now, and it will continue beyond every perception, identity, and boundary. The you believe yourself to be is smaller than the true you. The mind may tell a story of limitation, separation, and mortality, but awareness knows no boundaries. It is eternal, perceptive, and boundlessly expansive, the foundation upon which all reality unfolds.